You think progress is supposed to feel loud. You think it's supposed to announce itself. That's why you're weak. That's why you quit. In the beginning, progress is silent. It doesn't clap for you. It doesn't show receipts. It happens in the dark while nobody is watching, and that terrifies men who need validation to breathe. Here's the shock you don't want to hear. If your progress felt obvious at the start, everyone would succeed. The fact that it feels invisible is the filter. It's the system separating men who want power from men who want comfort. You don't see results because you're still becoming the man capable of holding them. Reality doesn't reward potential. It rewards identity. You've been lied to about momentum. Early progress isn't measurable in money, status, or applause. It's neurological. It's internal rewiring. It's you learning to operate in what I call speaking in tongues, not religious nonsense, but a private language of discipline and control that only you understand. You're taking actions your old self doesn't recognize. Your environment can't translate it yet. That's why it feels like nothing is happening. Speaking in tongues is when your behavior no longer matches your past identity. You wake up earlier without motivation. You train when your body complains. You work while your friends sleep. On the outside, it looks like nothing. On the inside, you're installing a new operating system. Weak men quit here because there's no feedback loop. Strong men continue because they don't need permission to evolve. This is where dominance is built. Not when the money hits. Not when the world respects you. Dominance is forged when you act in alignment with a future version of yourself that hasn't arrived yet. Discipline is you obeying orders from a higher self you haven't fully become. Control is staying locked in when there's no proof you're winning. Most men want results to justify effort. That's backwards. High-status men give effort first and let reality catch up later. When progress feels invisible, that's the exact moment you're separating from the herd. That's the painful identity shift. The old you is dying, and death is quiet. Progress is silent at the start because silence is the first test of authority. Loud results are for beginners and performers. Real power is built when nothing external confirms you're doing the right thing and you move anyway. This is where most men expose themselves. They don't quit because it's hard. They quit because it's quiet. No recognition, no visible upgrade, no proof that today's sacrifice matters. And without proof, their discipline collapses. That tells you everything you need to know about their ceiling. Early progress doesn't announce itself because it's not meant to motivate you. It's meant to filter you. If improvement screamed from day one, average men would stumble into success by accident. Silence exists to eliminate them. It forces you to answer one brutal question. Will you act without validation? Most men can't. They need someone watching. They need numbers going up. They need reassurance that they're special. Strip that away and they drift back to comfort, like addicts returning to the needle. The man who understands this gains a massive advantage. He stops chasing feelings and starts enforcing standards. He doesn't ask, do I feel like this is working? He asks, did I execute? That shift alone separates amateurs from operators. Silent progress builds internal authority. You're training yourself to obey decisions, not emotions. You're proving to yourself that you can act without applause. That's dangerous competence. That's the kind of man systems are built around. When progress is invisible, your mind starts negotiating. It whispers that you're wasting time. It compares you to people ahead of you. It asks for evidence. This is the real battlefield, not the gym, not the workday. This internal pressure is where discipline either sharpens or dissolves. Men who fail here blame strategy. Men who win here understand that the pressure is the strategy. Silence forces you to develop patience, precision, and self-trust. Without those, power is impossible to sustain. Invisible progress is also where entitlement dies. You stop expecting rewards for effort. You realize effort is the entry fee, not the prize. This is critical. Men who expect quick feedback are entitled even if they pretend they're ambitious. High-level men don't expect anything. They operate. They invest without immediate return because they understand compounding. One workout means nothing. One disciplined day means nothing. Repetition without recognition is what creates monsters. There's also a psychological edge being built that most men never experience. When you continue without results, you detach from outcomes and anchor into identity. You're no longer working out to look good. You're training because you're a disciplined man. You're no longer working to impress. You're working because this is what you do. Once behavior becomes identity-based, it becomes permanent. That's when progress accelerates. But by then, you're not desperate for it to show. Silence also protects you. Early visibility attracts noise, opinions, and weak energy. When nobody notices, you move clean. No distractions, no external pressure to perform. You're allowed to be inefficient, to experiment, to harden quietly. By the time results are visible, they're already locked in. There's no debate, no discussion, just presence. Most men misunderstand silence as stagnation. That's a low-resolution way of thinking. Silence is loading time. Systems upgrading don't make noise until they're ready to run at full capacity. If you panic during that phase, you interrupt the process. That's why patience is a form of dominance. You're telling reality you're not in a rush because you know exactly where this ends. If your progress feels invisible right now, that's not a problem. That's the environment where serious men are forged. Stay there, execute daily. Demand nothing. Let the silence do its job. Feeling nothing doesn't mean nothing is happening. That assumption is the first mistake weak men make, and it exposes how shallow their understanding of progress really is. They think growth should feel exciting, rewarding, obvious. They think effort must immediately translate into visible wins. When that doesn't happen, they panic. They label the process not working and retreat to comfort. In reality, the absence of feeling is often the clearest sign that something serious is underway. Early transformation happens below the surface. It's not emotional, it's structural. Your nervous system is adjusting. Your standards are shifting. Your tolerance for discomfort is expanding. None of that feels good. None of it feels dramatic. It feels flat, mechanical, almost boring. And that's exactly why it works. Men who rely on motivation need emotional spikes to stay engaged. Men who rely on discipline operate even when the emotional feedback is dead. The real issue is that most men confuse stimulation with progress. If they don't feel fired up, validated, or rewarded, they assume they're stalled. That's a childish framework. High-level development is dull at the start because it's repetitive and uncompromising. You're laying foundations, not showing off results. Concrete doesn't look impressive when it's poured. It looks impressive years later, when the building is still standing. When nothing seems to be happening, what's actually happening is alignment. Your actions are starting to match a higher standard, but your identity hasn't caught up yet. That gap creates emotional emptiness. You're no longer who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. Weak men can't tolerate that limbo. They need certainty. They need labels. They need reassurance. Strong men sit in that gap without flinching. This is also where impatience reveals itself. Men say they want success, but what they really want is evidence that they're special. Feeling nothing strips that fantasy away. You're left with raw execution. No ego fuel. No external confirmation. Just the work. This is where entitlement gets crushed. You stop believing effort deserves applause. You realize effort is the minimum requirement to stay in the game. The emotional flatline is a recalibration phase. Your brain is detaching reward from novelty and attaching it to consistency. That's rare. That's dangerous. Once that switch flips, you don't need excitement to perform. You don't need pressure. You don't need fear. You act because action is who you are. At that point, results become inevitable, not motivating. Most men never reach this stage because they mistake discomfort for failure. They feel tired, unenthused, uncertain, and assume something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. The system is working. Growth doesn't always feel like progress. Often it feels like resistance, doubt, and emotional silence. That's because your old identity is fighting extinction. It doesn't go quietly. It drains energy. It creates mental noise. If you stop now, it survives. If you continue, it dies. There's also a strategic advantage here. When you're not emotionally high or low, you make better decisions. You're less reactive, less impulsive. You stop chasing shortcuts because you're not desperate for relief. Calm execution under emotional neutrality is a lethal skill. It's what allows men to outlast competition that burns hot and collapses fast. The men who win understand a brutal truth. Feelings are unreliable indicators of progress. Systems don't care how you feel. Results don't care how inspired you are. Reality only responds to sustained behavior over time. Feeling nothing is often the sign that behavior is finally stabilizing. If your life sucks, it feels unrewarded, and progress feels distant, you're not behind, you're early. This is the stretch where discipline replaces emotion and identity begins to solidify. Stay there. Execute without expectation. Let the delay do its work. Invisible progress is internal domination, and most men never experience it because they fold before it finishes its work. They want proof. They want confirmation. They want something outside themselves to tell them they're becoming dangerous. But real dominance is built when the only thing watching is your own mind and you still don't break. That's where control is forged. Not in victory, not in recognition, but in quiet obedience to your own commands. Internal domination starts when you stop negotiating with yourself. Weak men debate every action. They ask how they feel. They ask if it's worth it. They ask if today really matters. Strong men don't ask. They decide. When progress is invisible, there's nothing distracting you from that internal dialogue. No rewards to hide behind. No excitement to mask weakness. Just a simple order and the question of whether you'll follow it. This is where self-respect is either built or destroyed. Every time you execute without seeing results, you prove to yourself that your word has weight. Every time you skip because nothing's happening, you teach yourself that your comfort outranks your standards. Over time, that compounds. Men who obey themselves become calm, grounded, and unshakable. Men who don't become anxious, reactive, and dependent on external pressure. Internal domination rewires your relationship with effort. You stop seeing effort as something you do to get something. You start seeing it as something you do because that's who you are. That shift is massive. It removes desperation from your actions. You're no longer chasing outcomes. You're enforcing identity. And identity-driven men don't need motivation. They don't need fear. They don't need supervision. They operate under all conditions. Most men fail here because this phase is lonely. There's no audience. No one clacks for consistency. No one notices discipline when it's quiet. That loneliness exposes whether a man is driven by ego or principle. Ego needs attention. Principle doesn't. When you continue without recognition, you're stripping ego out of the equation. What's left is pure execution. That's rare. That's why it's powerful. This internal control spills into everything. When you can dominate your impulses, outside chaos loses its grip on you. You don't react emotionally. You don't chase cheap wins. You don't get pulled into nonsense. You move slower, cleaner, more deliberately. People feel it before they understand it. Calm men with standards unsettle insecure environments. That's dominance without noise. Invisible progress is also where fear gets exposed and neutralized. When there's no visible payoff, fear starts inventing stories. It tells you you're wasting time. It tells you others are ahead. It tells you to change plans. If you give in, fear stays in control. If you keep moving, fear loses authority. You teach your nervous system that action doesn't require certainty. That alone puts you ahead of most men alive. This is the phase where discipline becomes automatic, not forced, not dramatic. Automatic, you wake up and do what needs to be done without emotional buildup. You don't feel powerful. You are powerful. That distinction matters. Feelings fluctuate. Systems don't. Internal domination means your behavior is no longer hostage to your mood. Men who reach this stage become dangerous not because they're aggressive, but because they're consistent. They don't burn out. They don't spiral. They don't self-sabotage when things get quiet. They understand that silence is part of the process, not a signal to stop. If your progress feels invisible, that's not weakness. That's the arena where internal authority is decided. Stay there long enough and you won't need external validation. You'll move with certainty because you've already proven to yourself who's in control. Discomfort is not a side effect of progress. It is the price of entry, and most men refuse to pay it. They talk about wanting more, but the moment confusion hits, the moment things stop feeling smooth or rewarding, they start looking for exits. That reaction alone explains why so few ever rise. The path isn't blocked by difficulty. It's blocked by discomfort. And discomfort exposes who was serious and who was pretending. If success felt clean and predictable, it wouldn't be exclusive. If clarity came first, everyone would walk the path. Instead, you're given friction. You're given uncertainty. You're given days where effort feels heavy and direction feels blurred. This isn't a mistake in the system. This is the system. Discomfort exists to filter out men who lack the capacity to endure pressure without reassurance. Confusion is especially important. Men want instructions. They want certainty. They want guarantees. When those disappear, they freeze. But confusion is where independent thinking is born. When you don't fully understand what's happening, yet you keep moving, you're training something most men never develop: decision-making without safety nets. That skill alone creates dominance in any environment. Leaders act before the full picture is visible. Followers wait until the picture is clear. Silence is the final toll. No applause, no recognition, no external confirmation that you're on the right track. This is where ego collapses. Men who are driven by attention suffocate here. Men driven by standards adapt. Silence forces you to confront your real motivations. Are you here to be seen, or are you here to win? If nobody ever acknowledged your effort, would you still execute? That answer determines your ceiling. Most men misinterpret this phase as punishment. They think the lack of visible reward means they made the wrong choice. That's weak pattern recognition. High-level processes always begin with resistance. Muscles tear before they grow. Businesses bleed before they scale. Identities fracture before they evolve. If you expect comfort while upgrading, you don't understand transformation. Discomfort strips away entitlement. It removes the fantasy that effort should feel good. It teaches you that effort is neutral. It's a tool. The man who accepts this stops chasing motivation and starts enforcing discipline. He doesn't need to feel confident to act. He acts, and confidence follows later as a byproduct, not a requirement. There's also a hierarchy being established internally during this phase. Every time you push through discomfort instead of escaping it, you elevate your authority over yourself. Every time you avoid it, you hand control back to impulse. Over time, that internal hierarchy becomes obvious in your posture, your speech, your presence. People can sense when a man has paid the toll. They can also sense when he hasn't. The truth most men don't want to hear is this: the pain doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're being evaluated. Not by the world, but by the process. Can you maintain standards without rewards? Can you tolerate not knowing? Can you move forward while feeling behind? These aren't emotional challenges. They're structural ones. They determine whether you're built for long-term power or short-term excitement. Men who quit at this stage don't fail loudly. They fade. They rationalize. They say that timing wasn't right or the strategy was wrong. What they're really saying is they couldn't tolerate the toll. They wanted progress without pressure, growth without friction, status without sacrifice. That combination doesn't exist. Those who stay don't feel heroic. They feel stretched, tested, occasionally unsure, but they keep going anyway. That's the difference. Not talent, not luck, not intelligence. The willingness to endure discomfort, confusion, and silence without demanding immediate payoff is what separates the few from the many. Discipline before evidence is the behavior that exposes hierarchy instantly. Most men claim they're ambitious, but their actions reveal something else entirely. They move only when rewarded. They perform only when results are visible. They need proof before commitment. That's not ambition. That's dependency. High-status behavior flips that logic. Action comes first. Evidence comes later. And if evidence never comes, the action still continues. This is where the separation becomes brutal. Low-status men need outcomes to justify effort. They ask, what do I get if I do this? That question alone caps their growth. It means their behavior is rented, not owned. The moment rewards slow down, they disappear. High-status men don't ask that question. They decide who they are, then behave accordingly. Results are not permission. They're consequences. Acting without evidence requires internal confidence, not the fake loud kind, but quiet certainty. It means you trust your judgment even when reality hasn't caught up yet. That scares people. Most men don't trust themselves. They trust numbers, praise, trends, and opinions. Strip those away and they freeze. The man who continues anyway immediately gains an edge because he's no longer governed by external signals. There's also a time delay most men don't understand. Reality moves slower than discipline. Behavior compounds silently before it shows. When you demand proof too early, you interrupt compounding. You dig up seeds to check if they're growing, then complain nothing survived. Discipline before evidence is patience weaponized. It's understanding that the scoreboard always lags behind the work. Men who wait for evidence are always late. By the time results are obvious, the opportunity is crowded. By the time something looks safe, the upside is gone. Acting early feels foolish to insecure men because it lacks social approval. Acting early feels natural to high-status men because they're not seeking consensus. They lead themselves first. The world follows later. This mindset also eliminates emotional volatility. When your behavior is tied to outcomes, your mood rises and falls with circumstances. That's instability. When your behavior is tied to identity, your mood becomes irrelevant. You execute on good days and bad days with the same standard. That consistency creates momentum. Others can't replicate because they're too busy reacting. Discipline before evidence also kills excuses. You can't hide behind "it's not working yet." You can't blame timing. You can't blame conditions. The only question becomes whether you followed through. That level of accountability is uncomfortable. which is exactly why it builds power. Men avoid responsibility because it exposes their lack of control. Men who embrace it become formidable. There's a psychological intimidation factor here too. People can sense when a man isn't chasing approval, when he doesn't need validation, when his actions don't change based on feedback. That calm persistence unsettles insecure environments. It signals independence. It signals authority. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that doesn't need it. Most men never experience this level of self-trust because they abandon the process too early. They confuse uncertainty with danger. They mistake lack of feedback for failure. They retreat just before discipline solidifies into identity. The few who don't retreat stop needing encouragement entirely. They move because stopping would feel unnatural. When discipline comes before evidence, you stop negotiating with reality. You place your standards above your circumstances. You don't wait to feel confident. You don't wait to feel ready. You act, and confidence forms as a byproduct of repetition. Readiness becomes irrelevant. You're already in motion. This is the mindset that creates long-term dominance. Not bursts of effort, not emotional surges. Quiet, relentless execution without needing reassurance. Men who master this don't chase success. They become inevitable. The moment you doubt but continue anyway is the moment most men never reach. Because doubt is where their discipline collapses. They treat doubt like a warning sign instead of a test. They assume uncertainty means stop, reassess, pull back. That reaction exposes a fragile core. Strong men recognize doubt as resistance, not instruction. They keep moving because movement isn't based on emotional clarity, it's based on command. Doubt shows up when progress is about to separate you from who you used to be. It's not random. It arrives precisely when consistency starts to threaten your old identity. Your mind looks for exits. It asks smarter-sounding questions. It demands logic, reassurance, and guarantees. None of that is wisdom. It's self-preservation. The version of you that benefited from comfort doesn't want to lose control. Continuing through doubt is not blind persistence. It's disciplined awareness. You know the fear is psychological, not structural. You understand that no meaningful process feels certain in real time. Men who wait for confidence before acting never move. Confidence is built after repetition, not before it. Acting while doubting trains a rare skill. Forward motion under mental pressure. This is where most men betray themselves quietly. They don't fail dramatically. They slow down, they skip once, they rationalize, they tell themselves they'll restart later with more clarity. That delay is the decision. Momentum dies not from exhaustion, but from hesitation. Doubt doesn't need to win outright. It just needs you to pause long enough to regain control. When you continue anyway, something shifts internally. You stop treating thoughts as commands. You see them as noise. Fear loses authority. Emotion loses veto power. Action becomes non-negotiable. This creates psychological dominance over yourself, which is far more important than dominating any external situation. Men who can't command themselves will never command outcomes. There's also a compounding effect most men miss. Every time you act through doubt, your tolerance increases. What once felt heavy becomes manageable. What once caused hesitation becomes background static. Over time, doubt still appears, but it doesn't slow you. It's acknowledged and ignored. That's not arrogance. That's conditioning. This is why men who reach high levels of control appear calm under pressure. They've trained in uncertainty. They've operated without clarity. They've made decisions while their mind tried to pull them backward. Pressure doesn't shake them because they've already proven to themselves that discomfort doesn't dictate behavior. The critical mistake men make is believing doubt should disappear with progress. It doesn't. It evolves. The stakes rise. The risks increase. The mind responds by intensifying resistance. If your strategy relies on feeling sure, you will stall at every new level. Men who keep winning accept doubt as part of the environment, not a personal flaw. Continuing anyway also sharpens your intuition. When you don't overreact to mental noise, you start distinguishing between real signals and emotional interference. You become less impulsive, less reactive. Decisions get cleaner. Execution gets tighter. This is how leaders operate. They don't need constant certainty. They need alignment with their standards. There's an isolation that comes with this phase. You can't explain it to people who stop when it gets uncomfortable. They won't understand why you keep pushing when results aren't obvious. That's fine. Explanation is for equals. Execution is for builders. The need to be understood fades when self-trust solidifies. Men who master this phase become dangerous in a quiet way. They don't collapse under uncertainty. They don't need encouragement. They don't wait for permission. Doubt visits, realizes it has no leverage, and leaves. What remains is momentum built on discipline, not emotion. If you're moving forward while questioning yourself, you're not lost. You're in the narrow stretch where real separation happens. Keep going. The doubt isn't there to stop you. It's there to see if you're serious. Here's the truth. Nobody wants to accept. The silence is the signal. If you're uncomfortable, confused, and doubting but still moving, you're on the right path. The men who feel motivated at the start are playing games. The men who feel nothing and keep going are building empires. So understand this and lock it in. Progress doesn't feel invisible because you're failing. It feels invisible because you're early. Stay silent. Stay disciplined. Keep speaking that private language of action and control. One day, the world will understand it. By then, you won't need them to.